All right, so today I went and worked on my daughter's Honda a little more. She's driven it for a couple weeks, and we figured out a few little problems with it and worked on it. And in return, she colored my hair for me. Thank you, Delaney. But talking to her about her car and about cheap cars in general, it got me to thinking cars are a lot of what's keeping us poor. And I don't mean just my family, but I mean Americans in general. We don't realize just how much money we're putting into a depreciating asset. And if you've noticed in the last couple of years, I've had about a dozen cars on this channel. Just me doing work, somebody in the family gets another car and I look at it and they're all, for the most part, cheap cars. I don't think I've had the only car that might be over $10,000 in value would be the Mustang, and it's barely there. I deal in a lot of cheap cars because I don't like having car payments. As it is right now, we own all our cars outright. I don't owe anybody for my cars. And that's the way you should be. Cars are a depreciating asset. You're getting charged on the interest on a purchase that's declining in value. And that's what a lot of people get caught up in. You see right now, there's a lot of people who owe more than their car's worth. And cars are going under and people are getting stuck with, they get their car repossessed, but then they still owe a huge bill because the car didn't sell for what they owed on it. And you see the credit crunch going on right now where auto lenders are refusing to lend. They used to lend at 120% of a car's value, and it got up to where they were lending 150%. So if you had a car that was a $30,000 car, they would lend you $45,000 for it. Now what happens when you stop paying? They take that car away from you. They can't get their $45,000 back because you're not going to pay once they've taken your car from you, most people. And so they end up sticking you with a bill on your credit that you have to pay off to clean up your credit, and then they are selling the car at a loss. So you're in a race when you buy a car and you take a payment out on it. You're in a race to pay that car off before it becomes worthless. And I don't like participating in that race. I learned as an early on as a technician, my paychecks were up and down every week, because we got flag hours. And so I always saved up money. I had money saved up because I didn't know if my next paycheck was going to cover the bills. And that stuck with me. I also have parents who are very thrifty and taught me that lesson. I've had a lot of peers who are really big into not carrying debt. And so I never wanted to carry debt. I don't want to be in debt. I don't like having that weight over my head. If you're in debt to somebody, that means you've got to do what they tell you to do. I like my freedom. And so I'm not going to go into big debt. And so I encourage you, look at your cars and what they're costing you and decide, do I want to be in debt for this? Now, the other thing about cars, the reason people are willing to go into debt is because they give you freedom. At no other time in human history have we had this much freedom, and it's because of a tool we have. You can hop in your car and drive across the country if you don't like what's going on. And so the freedom from having a car is addictive. It's very addictive, and people aren't willing to give up cars. And I live in a state where there is no there's no serious public transportation. There's a few bus routes, but you're not going to be able to function as an adult in the Oklahoma City area if you don't have a car, period. A car is a necessity. And automakers see how much cars are important to us. They see how addicted we are to them, how much we have to have them to function in some places, and that's the way they want it. And that's why prices are climbing for new cars right now. There's a shortage of cars on the market, and people can't afford the cars, and automakers are just cranking up the price anyways because they know that we have to have cars one way or the other. And it's not necessarily that they want us in indentured servitude, but they want to make their profit. And there's no other way around it. We have to have cars. And if you look at auto regulation over the years, the automakers like to play like they don't like all this regulation. Oh, OBD1 was so terrible. OBD2 was even more terrible. Oh my gosh, we've got these airbag rules. They love it. all this other stuff that's been added on the cars that, is all this onerous regulation that's making us have to put all this extra stuff on cars, they're charging you for. That $10,000 car from 30 years ago is now a $30,000 car because all the extra stuff they've added on. And if you look at the price of cars, it's outpacing inflation. So do yourself a favor and find those bargains and learn to repair your cars. That's the bigger thing, is nobody wants to repair cars. Now if you watch me screw up stuff around here, half the time I feel incompetent in what I'm doing. And I'm actually an experienced technician. I went through school. I have a associate's degree in auto repair. I spent a couple of years in the field, realized I was getting scammed, got out of it, but I've always at least been a hobbyist mechanic on top of being a serious mechanic for the Air Force, working on equipment, and from being a hobbyist racer and being the lead mechanic on our race team. I feel incompetent a lot of the time, and cars are purposefully complicated to make you feel that way. The automakers don't want you fixing a 20-year-old car and driving it for another 20 years. They want that car to break so that you have to buy a new one. You go to a junkyard. All those cars sitting there in the junkyard, almost every one of them, 95% of the parts are good on it. What drives a car to the junkyard? It's usually one failure that's too expensive, or it's too expensive when another car is cheaply available. You're going to start seeing people repair more and more cars, and the automakers aren't going to like it. They're going to try to make it to where you can't repair cars. They've been trying to make it to where you can't repair cars. If you look at the troubles I'm having with the Ford Focus and the Mustang, where stuff is just stacked on top of other stuff to make it more complicated to repair it, that's what the automakers are doing. And they're making stuff a little more obscure and hard to find. So you're just going to have to work around it. Push yourself. If you screw up and it costs you money, well, it's a learning experience. More than likely, you're still dollars ahead of if you had taken it to a shop, or if you'd had to go out and buy another car. Take the time, learn what you need to work on your own cars. And remember, cars are a depreciating asset. You're always fighting that third law of thermodynamics. Everything's trying to move towards disorder, and you're trying to keep all the marbles back in the circle to keep that car running. You'll feel incompetent. You will. I do all the time. And I have a lot of doubts about my abilities. And I've worked with some really awesome people in my lifetime who I've seen their skill, and it makes me feel incompetent. But I also see a lot of the incompetence that's out there. And if you're able to change your own oil and do minor maintenance and do minor fixes and not make the problem worse, then you're competent. You're doing better than a lot of mechanics who are charging money for their work. So get out there, turn your wrenches, do research, look up videos on YouTube, learn how to do stuff. The Honda today, I had to disconnect the battery to replace a little module under the hood that, the load sensing module. I'd never heard of that before. I watched a YouTube video, learned about it, changed it out, but I disconnected the battery. Stereo went dead. You have to input the code to get the stereo working again. So I looked up a video on that. 5 minutes later, we had the stereo working again. Learn this stuff. Research it. Don't spend money unnecessarily on cars.